I'm walking down a dusty path in the Catalan Pyrenees. Dark clouds are building overhead, whipped up by the heat. A breeze whispers past, bringing the smells of fresh mown hay, distant rain, and, when the direction changes, lots of manure. The map has promised a secret crossing into France, and I'm curious. How secret could it be, out in the open field like this? The path follows the train tracks leaving Puigcerdà, 3 hours north of Barcelona, where I'm staying for a few days. I've been walking for a while. The border must be here somewhere. But when I pull out my phone, Google Maps tells me I've already passed it. It was about 200 meters ago. I turn back to see if I've missed something, and all I find is a stone marker hidden in the brambles, with a number and a line across the top that may indicate the direction of the border. The map says I've got 1 foot in Spain and 1 in France. Is this it? Otherwise, nothing indicates an international border. Not even the hayfield is broken into a Spanish and a French side. The path just stretches off towards the next line of mountains. I guess that's the secret. A gunshot cracks through the quiet air, followed by its booming echo a second later. Hunters somewhere. So now I'm in France, and the town on the side of the hill is La Tour de Carol. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. I apologize for my French pronunciation. There's only a little bit of that in this article, but I don't know how I'm supposed to talk about obscure places like La Tour de Carol without butchering a French liquid R or something like that. So, this is episode 51. It's about the border, the Hispano-French border. That sounds a lot better in Spanish. La frontera hispano-francesa. In English, well, whatever. The border between France and Spain in Catalonia, a few hours north of Barcelona by train. I was up there a couple of weeks ago, and here's the report. We're going to be getting into some Catalan stuff, independence stuff here. The other day, 2 days ago, on Monday, was the Catalan National Day. They celebrate it on September 11th. That is the anniversary of the siege of Barcelona from 1714. We'll be talking about the siege of Barcelona later. Also, we've got some stuff about the Bourbon and Habsburg monarchies, pig's feet in small villages, and much more. So, we left this on a dusty path in the Pyrenees. Let's take it up again across the border in France. There's not much happening here on the French side. An old guy in a pink polo shirt has leaned his bike against a stone wall. He's picking blackberries and dropping them into a thermos. He mumbles something to me in Catalan as I walk by. In town, I see one house with a quaint little sign next to the door saying, Aquí hi viu un català. A Catalan lives here. The public signs are all in French. Pharmacie, chambre, funéraire, poste. I apologize again for my French pronunciation. Pharmacy, funeral home, and post office, but in French. Imagine what it would sound like if a French person were saying it. Anyway, the town of La Tour de Carol doesn't have a bar, doesn't have a single open business on a Sunday afternoon. Even the cafe outside the train station, Bistrot de la Gare, is closed. Meanwhile, it's starting to rain, so I take shelter in the station building. A few pairs of backpackers are coming down from the hills, waiting for trains to Barcelona or Toulouse or Paris. There's also a family of 6 hanging out. That's Sikhs, the religious group from the north of India, among other places. Not six the number, there were only four of them. After a few minutes, the rain stops, and I head back to Puigcerdà down the same dusty path. This region is called Cerdanya, not to be confused with the Italian island of Sardinia, and it's divided in two by the French border, like Catalonia itself. Not many people are talking about the French region of northern Catalonia, otherwise known as Roussillon. I didn't find out about it myself until I saw a bunch of Catalan flags on a visit to Perpignan several years ago. Back at the hotel, I do some research into the stone I saw at the border. The numbered stones are called mojones, it turns out, and there are a lot of them around here, marking the line between France and Spain. What is a border, anyway? This border was set down in 1659 by the Treaty of the Pyrenees, officially ending the Franco-Spanish War begun in 1635. Peace was signed by Louis XIV of France and Philip IV of Spain on Pheasant Island on the river between Irún and Hendaye in the Basque Country. Today, the uninhabited island is shared by France and Spain with a joint sovereignty agreement known officially as a condominium. Conditions of the treaty include Philip sent his daughter Maria Teresa off to marry Louis. A bit of northern France changed hands. Spain had dominions around Europe at that time: Belgium, Naples, Sicily, the aforementioned Sardinia, and more. The French gave up their claim to Barcelona. The Franco-Spanish border would be drawn across the Pyrenees. I guess things got pretty busy for the monarchies of Europe afterwards, because the final border line wasn't drawn until 2 centuries later, as part of the treaties of Bayonne in the late 19th century. That line is now marked by the mojones. There are around 600 mojones, set down along a line in the Pyrenees between the Cantabrian Sea over in the Basque Country and the Mediterranean in Port-Beau, and then some more surrounding Llibia, a Spanish town across the French border. The final number of the sequence is 602, but some mojones are doubled up. There are full maps online. Apparently there are hikers who collect mojones. They go and they photograph all of them. Upon drawing the line and connecting it with the mojones, some villages changed hands, but the town of Llibia wasn't a village. Declared to be a villa, a small town with certain privileges, centuries before, it retained that status as the former capital of Cerdanya. Since the treaty only stipulated that villages on the French side would pass over to France, Llibia stayed with Spain, and there it is today, a Spanish exclave just 6 kilometers across the French border. Exclave is a word I had never heard before. Apparently it's pretty similar to enclave. Maybe you could say that Llibia is both exclave and enclave, depending on your perspective. In any case, Llibia is where I head the next day, leaving the hotel a bit after 7 in the morning. I first crossed the border right after the kiddie playground a few kilometers outside Puigcerdà and walk through the town of Ur, where I get a coffee and a pain au chocolat, because France, at the only open business, a small bakery. Then a walk between bucolic farms out toward Llibia. Llibia is cute, like a tiny Andorra, an even tinier Andorra than the original. It's got a main street, a historic center, a Plaza Mayor that's about the size of my Barcelona living room, and a large hill with the ruins of a castle on top. Like many Spanish towns, it was founded by the Romans. A Roman forum was found there in 2017, and I may have walked right past it on my search for further coffee in the neighborhood of the church. The church has graves from the 1620s in its floor. People with Catalan names who died 400 years ago. In the end, not much is open in Yivia at 10 in the morning, and I decide to head back to Puigcerdà. It's getting hot, and if I stick around for lunch, I'll be caught in either heat or rain later on. The landscape on the way back sure is nice. A green valley between rows of mountains, dotted with farmhouses. There's another very small French town, Onsas, and another cemetery with more French and Catalan-sounding names on the tombs, this time from the 1950s. About 400 meters from the border, I stop at a bar with not one but two waitresses who, despite the location, don't speak a word of English or Spanish. Just French. Oh well. I get a free dam and move on. Walking back through the French town of Bourg-Madame, which is connected to Puigcerdà by a small bridge, I come to an unused border checkpoint. The border at this point is a small river called El Raur. There's a guy in a bright yellow vest from the Instituto Nacional de Estadística standing there, perhaps counting the cars going across. The last thing open on the French side is a shop selling oysters. First thing open on the Spanish side, a gas station and tobacco shop. Gas and tobacco might be among the few things that change prices right across the border. Most products are protected by the EU and the Schengen zone these days. Oysters? I'm not sure. Bourg-Madame has a sign on the bridge between the two countries, explaining a bit about the Spanish refugees who crossed during and after the Civil War. There were plenty of Spanish people who emigrated during the war and the dictatorship. Some just picked up and did it on foot across the mountains. Tough times. Across the border back in Spain, or southern Catalonia if you prefer, there's a steak place that looks good. But when I sit down, the waiter tells me they haven't gotten their meat delivery yet. So, no steak. How about chicken? Yes, they have that, but it'll take 25 minutes. What do they have that's quicker? Pig's feet. Peus de porc are common in restaurants in Catalonia. They're a bunch of tiny bones wrapped in skin, with some fat and cartilage you can chew on. About 2 bites of meat. It's actually better than it sounds, but it leaves me hungry, still craving steak. Guess I'll try again at dinner. That afternoon there's a massive rainstorm, and I'm stuck standing under an umbrella on Puigcerdà's town square for about half an hour. I end up eating a mixed grill for dinner at some Brazilian restaurant. Lots of protein this time, both beef and pork. Not bad. Contented, I head back to the hotel and sleep. The Franco-Spanish War was a conflict between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. I don't have a strong opinion about monarchies per se, but it seems pretty ridiculous that we're still talking about and being ruled by that same Bourbon family 400 years later. But we are. The descendants of the French Bourbons of those days were eventually guillotined. You're probably familiar with the story. Spain, however, hasn't managed to rid itself of the monarchy quite yet. Although, as you may recall from my recent articles and podcasts about the Civil War, they certainly have tried. The current king, Felipe, aka Philip VI, is a Bourbon. The first Bourbon king of Spain was actually Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, who took the throne in 1700. More about him later. He's key in the Catalan national myth. In any case, it's depressing that a whole lot of the history of Europe can be boiled down to power grabs among a handful of families. The rest of us have been scraping by to little fanfare in the meantime for centuries or millennia. My family of poor potato farmers, or whatever they were, would have emigrated to America in the 1800s. Now, I'm back in Europe. Nobody's building statues of us on either side of the Atlantic. Guess I should have been born a Bourbon. Here's a question. What does it mean to belong to a people? Catalonia was never actually an independent nation. At most, it was a recognized cultural or geographical area and a principality subject to the Crown of Aragon. But the basic premise of the Catalan independence movement is that there is a Catalan people, which is distinct from and allegedly oppressed by a Spanish people. What does it mean to belong to a people in that sense? Un pueblo, as they call it in Spanish. The word means not just village, but also the capital P people of a region or country. It's used 4 times in the preamble to the 1978 Spanish Constitution, and then again in Article 1. El pueblo español, los pueblos de España, la voluntad popular, etc. But what does it really mean? I suppose I'll never know. I grew up in a patch of Arizona desert where all the buildings were just a few years old. Nobody was rooted to the area. It wasn't a community. It wasn't even really a neighborhood or a town. I got out as soon as I could. And that's not unusual for American people. There's that word people again. My parents are from faraway places they don't go back to or speak of fondly. My grandparents were as well. Pick a spot, hang out for a few years, move on as soon as you get a better opportunity somewhere else. It's an American tradition. I sometimes hear about these families that have owned the same business in the same town for several generations, and I can see the appeal. 5th generation bakers of pan au chocolat in a town with a name like Ur. I don't have anything like that. It's not very common where I'm from. Also, technically, you can own a bakery for 5 generations without being part of the people. Just ask the Sephardic Jews, to give you just one example. They were expelled from Spain in 1492, presumably for not fitting into the new all-Christian Spain after the Reconquista. Is the people a religious group then? I guess sometimes it is. Then again, a Marxist friend once told me that some people were actually enemies of the people. Successful business owners, I think it was. In other words, the dreaded bourgeoisie. In that case, the people is a social class, presumably. And I think anybody using these types of nearly meaningless abstractions probably has a really ugly ideology they're trying to sell you on. But what if the people, as in the Catalan case, is actually an ethnic and linguistic group? In other words, how are you going to defend the linguistic and cultural purity of your tiny ethno-state in these times of mass immigration and tolerance for other cultures, without sounding at times a bit racist? Seems like it could be a problem. What is the Catalan identity? Giles Tremlett in Ghosts of Spain, highly recommendable book, goes to some length to try to find out what makes Catalan people allegedly different than the Spanish. In the end, he doesn't find much. A few silly customs like stacking themselves into human towers at festivals and putting pig's feet on restaurant menus, plus a general feeling and a regional government willing to throw money at almost anything that's done in the Catalan language. None of which is particularly convincing to me. Almost every region of Spain could say the same thing, could claim to be a separate people if they wanted to. So could the various regions of France, Germany, Italy, etc., etc., etc. And then what would we have? A Europe made up of micro-states, principalities, dukedoms, and despotates, like in the Middle Ages. At the time Tremlett was writing, of course, the Catalan government had been run by a Catalan nationalist named Jordi Pujol for virtually the whole time since Franco's death. Pujol had constructed quite a cult of personality over his quarter-century in power, and had done a lot to build up the feeling of Catalan nationalism. But his career and reputation came crashing down some years later when it was revealed that he'd been hiding millions of euros in bank accounts in Andorra and possibly elsewhere. He claimed it was an inheritance from his father, and he'd never found the right moment to declare it on his taxes. Allegedly, he was also getting kickbacks from the companies doing work for the government. His son Oriol was implicated in something similar, and both retired from politics due to the scandal. And so the mastermind behind the modern Catalan nation spent a few months in prison, and might spend more if the trial ever gets going. A judge has said there's evidence that the whole family works as a criminal organization. On the other hand, Jordi Pujol, born in 1930, is currently 93, so it might not matter soon. Every country has a national myth, and so does every people with aspirations towards nationhood. So of course, there are some important historical moments the Catalans like to talk about. The siege of Barcelona in 1714, for example. That was part of the Spanish War of Succession, pitting the Bourbon Philip V, grandson of Louis XIV, remember, against the Austrian Habsburg Charles VI, also Holy Roman Emperor, for rule of the Spanish Empire. Those same two families again, Bourbons and Habsburgs, fighting another war a few decades later. Succession laws turn out to be pretty complex, and I don't want to get into it. Suffice it to say that most Spanish nobility supported Philip, but the Catalan nobility supported Charles. Philip's troops laid siege to Barcelona and were eventually victorious, bringing the Bourbon rule, which has lasted with some interruptions up until the present day. Philip was also big into centralizing the Spanish government, so that was the end of the Catalan courts, the end of the independent Principality of Catalonia. There are monuments to the siege of 1714 near my house in Barcelona. They portray the War of Succession as part of Catalonia's long struggle against totalitarian regimes, but I have my doubts. In any case, the monuments are obviously new, as if they were constructed a couple decades ago as part of someone's nation-building exercise. How many Catalans have a family tree going back to 1714? How many would know about the siege of Barcelona at all, if it weren't a key part of their national myth? Then, of course, there's the civil war and the dictatorship. During the latter, the Catalan language was suppressed. Franco was no fan of Catalonia, all of which may have given the locals a bad feeling about belonging to Spain. Then again, people from Valencia and the Balearic Islands, Majorca, etc., speak virtually the same language and want nothing to do with the independence movement. These historical articles have a tendency to spiral out of control if I let them. Do I need to know more about the Franco-Spanish War? Read a biography of Louis XIV or Maria Teresa? Get my Catalan up to a level where I can read about the Reapers' War of 1640 in original version? Unfortunately, I considered doing all these things in the process of writing this article. Also, the Catalan issue is controversial and important to the future of Spain. These days, several years after their illegal, unconstitutional referendum for independence, most Catalans have mentally checked out of the movement and gone on to other concerns. But the leader of the independence movement, Carles Puigdemont, is still hanging out in Waterloo, outside Brussels, and demanding amnesty for everyone involved in the referendum, in exchange for his party's votes in Parliament. This may be necessary to seat the new government after the recent election ended in a virtual tie between right and left. We'll find out soon. But speaking of amnesty, as I write this, many of the top headlines in La Vanguardia and El País contain the word amnistia, with pictures of Puigdemont or left-wing politician and pardoned former prisoner Oriol Junqueras Junqueras, possibly. Looking sadly away from the camera. One headline, "Amnesty isn't enough. We need to think about self-determination." In that article, Junqueras says he wants not just amnesty for everyone involved in the 2017 referendum, but he also wants the crimes of sedition and misuse of public funds to be stricken from the books so that they can't be used against anyone in the future. Then he'll talk about maybe supporting the Socialist Party. I'm not sure how many countries go around removing the laws prohibiting the overthrow of the government when asked, but I'm guessing it's not common. Back in the dusty heat of Cerdanya, the next day I decide to go uphill. Wikiloc shows me a route through the nearby towns of Saneja and Guils de Cerdanya, and again I start early to avoid the worst of the heat. I'm not sure who, if anyone, lives in these tiny stone villages year-round. The sun gets hotter and hotter, and the climb outside Guils is steep, but I finally make it to a reasonable turnaround point where a sign marks the various directions. Niula, Cabanella, Bosque de Guils. I pick a nearly invisible sheep trail to go back to town and stop for coffee and water at the bottom of the hill in Guils. In the town's one restaurant, the proprietors speak Catalan to each other and Spanish to me. That's pretty typical. Nobody looks at me and sees someone fluent in Catalan, and it's usually easier to start the conversation in Spanish rather than English. Guils de Cerdanya has an English Wikipedia page that's 2 sentences long. The second sentence is, attractions include the Romanesque church of Sant Estevan, 12th century. What else attractions include is not mentioned, although, to be fair, the Catalan Wikipedia article is several sentences longer and goes so far as to claim that Pontius Pilate, according to legend, was from the town and returned there after having Jesus crucified. The Catalan Wikipedia page for Pontius Pilate says he was from Abruzzo in the south of Italy and doesn't mention Guils de Cerdanya at all, so maybe they should cross-reference their sources. Anyway, from there it's just a few dusty trails and old stone churches back to Puigcerdà, where I hydrate and start, once again, my search for a good steak. That's about all I got for today. I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks to Carmen, who read this blog post and commented on it, mentioning a couple of historical points that I had left out, but that I was able to put in for this version on the podcast. Please like and subscribe and leave a review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever it is you're listening, if there is a review function. Leaving a review would help me a lot. You can donate. Go to expatmadrid.com/donate and send me some money. I appreciate that very much. You could contact me with ideas for future topics or questions that you might have. I'm at expatmadrid.com/contact, or you can just go to the blog at expatmadrid.com and check out the contact form. It's easy to find. You could buy my books on Amazon, but if you're listening to this, you probably don't need to learn English. If you have Spanish-speaking friends, though, you could buy my books as gifts for them. Look for me on Amazon. I am Daniel Welsh. I'm also Daniel Welsh on Instagram. You can follow me there. You could find me on Facebook. I don't use Facebook that much, but, social media, I'm around. You could go to YouTube and find my channel, Learn Spanish with Daniel. That is exactly what it sounds like. I give short Spanish lessons on there. I made a video this morning explaining some weird Spanish vocabulary that you might need. And that's about it. I hope you have a great day wherever you are in the world. Thanks for listening. Hasta la próxima. Bye.